Tonight, we delve into the story of a young carny who rises up from barker to mentalist to spiritualist guru to the rich before falling and crashing down to the bottom of the geek pit in Nightmare Alley. Attention patrons! The movies discussed on this podcast will be spoiled from start to finish. If you wish to experience these cinematic gems visually, please do so before continuing with this episode. We will be right here when you return. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.
And now, please enjoy our featured presentation.
Welcome to the Art House Drive-In Picture Show. I'm Charles, and of course that other guy over there that you can't see is Aaron.
Hi.
I can't see him. He's actually on the other side
of
the drive-in today because we've got this goddamned Omicron variant, and so instead of 6 feet apart, we are, 4,000 miles apart.
Yeah, we are extra safe. And
Yeah.
I don't know why I laughed when you said Omicron, except every time I hear it, it sounds like a transformer. And I'm like,
It does.
the very first time I heard Omicron, I was like, I don't remember him from anything. Then I'm like, oh, wait.
Yeah.
So I'm really doubling down on the scary name
Yeah.
this time.
I think he was voiced by James Earl Jones. I think
I think he
it was like Orson Welles who did Orson Welles voice? Did he voice?
Yeah, he was one of them. I'm not super nerdy Transformers enough to know.
I've never seen the Transformers movie. And
they're great. They're like popcorn great. What they're great at is spotlighting advances in technology.
Right.
So like when it was like, here's an HD TV and look, this is Transformers on it. You're just like, holy shit,
Right.
Look at that.
It's like a Best Buy reel.
Yeah, they're just commercials for tech.
Well, let's talk about, it's funny that you bring up tech because that does kind of hook into the movie we're talking about tonight, which is the 1947 version of Nightmare Alley, which is written, of course, the book by William Lindsay Gresham. The movie was written by Jules Furthman and then directed by Edmund Goulding. And we kind of are doing this as a little bit of a pregame for people who are going to go see Guillermo del Toro's new adaptation that should be released hopefully the same day as this episode. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but if it does.
Or for people like me who were like, oh, I didn't know that Del Toro was doing a remake.
Yeah.
I just thought it was his own thing. And now I'm finding out it's a remake. It's a book. It's possibly a graphic novel.
Yeah. According to him, it's not a remake. You got to get, he's going because, and he's going back to the book. And he said the book is a whole saga. And so you won't be able to really adapt the book, which is true. I mean, from a certain perspective. But we should just lay out the story up front. So for people who haven't seen it or don't know anything about it, as the little disclaimer said at the beginning of this episode, this movie will be spoiled start to finish. And in spoiling this movie from the 40s, we will inevitably spoil at least some or possibly all of Guillermo del Toro's movie. So
easily 87%, 88%. Easily.
So be on lookout for that. If you want to go see that movie and then come back to this, that is your prerogative. The basic story of the movie, it's about this guy named Stan Carlisle. In this movie, he's played by Tyrone Power. And Carlisle basically goes from a carnival barker to being part of a mentalist act in the carnival to doing mentalism in nightclubs to being a spiritualist guru to rich people to then being found out and cascading all the way back down to the point where he becomes a carnival geek at the end. And if you don't know what a geek is, no, it is not the motherfucker who fixes your computer.
Yeah.
At that time, it was usually a man who would bite the heads off of chickens or rats in a carnival sideshow, like a Ten-In-One Sideshow or whatever. So that's the basic story. There's a whole lot of other things in here that we'll talk about. But had you ever seen this movie before?
No, honestly, I did not know that this existed. Even more to that point, I didn't know much about Tyrone Power, like, at all.
Right.
Like, it just, he's got one of those, like, yeah, he's obviously a 40s actor with that name.
Right.
But I didn't know anything about it. I just knew, hey, this new Del Toro movie isn't going to be about ghosts. That's going to be weird. And then you talk to me about this. I'm like, what? This is an actual, and yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah, it's a fantastic movie. Like, a couple of years ago, I heard that Del Toro was doing Nightmare Alley, and it sounded familiar to me, but then I was just kind of like, well, whatever. And then Criterion put out their edition, I think this year, of Nightmare Alley, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'd heard about that movie. But if I'm not mistaken, I think the movie wasn't available for a few decades because when it was released, it was basically a box office flop, if you consider that a sign of success or not. I really don't, but I know studios do, and then that also influences if they ever release it to television or if they release it to, home video now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was a box office flop, mainly because Fox didn't really get behind it, because they didn't really believe in it, and whoever the head was, I think it might have been like Zanuck or somebody like that, didn't want to have Tyrone Power play this role because it was against the swashbuckling / romantic lead that he had been playing before and that he played for most of the time after Nightmare Alley.
Yeah, which is sad because he is awesome.
He's really great. And, I think that he wanted to play this part because he came from a whole line of stage actors. Like his family had been very credible stage actors. And so I think that was one reason he wanted to do something like this, because he was coming off of Razor's Edge, which I think actually was a box office success. But Razor's Edge still yet wasn't quite I've not seen his Razor's Edge. I've seen the one that Bill Murray, I think. Was it Bill Murray? Yeah. Bill Murray was in that one. And that character isn't terribly complex. So, I don't think it was quite enough for Tyrone Power, even though it was a more serious film.
Yeah.
I think it was, like Imogen Sarah Smith said, that he was like a lot of these actors who came back from World War II, that they came back wanting to play more serious roles because they had seen like a lot of really heinous stuff, and it kind of made them rethink what they were doing in their day job, basically.
It makes perfect sense.
It really does. It really does. And the interesting thing is that with this movie, with Nightmare Alley and Tyrone Power, in a way, he kind of mirrors William Lindsay Gresham in the way that he wrote the book. Because the book came out in like 1946, I think, the year before this movie was made. And it was a big success. But Gresham, had bounced around a lot. He was an alcoholic. He had gone to fight in Spain during the Spanish Civil War, I think, and was pretty scarred by his experiences over there. But that was also where he heard about carny life. He was told by this male nurse over there about that nurse's experiences in the carnival. And so that's when he became interested in the carnival and picked up some of the lingo and that kind of thing. That's funny. So, he comes back from war and he's pretty scarred by that experience. And so, he ends up writing this book that deals with alcoholism, that deals with spiritualism, which he got into. He had tried all these different things like psychoanalysis and Dianetics and, Zen Buddhism and, all these different stuff. He'd been a Presbyterian, at some point. So for Tyrone Power, the movie was kind of like an experience that he wanted to have coming out of his traumatic experiences in the war. And I think for Gresham, it was similar. And it didn't work out for Power. It did work out for Gresham, at least for a while, even though this is the only successful book that he ever had, really. But I guess, like, this is kind of an ugly segue, but I think, in talking about that, I think maybe we should start by talking about the structure of the film, because the mirroring in the film is very, very, very overt.
Yes.
It's like, it's so overt that you could almost set your watch by, a character saying a certain thing at a certain time,
Yeah.
What did you think of the structure of the film and the mirroring? Was it annoying, or?
I guess initially when this movie started, it had a very Twilight Zone-y feel to me.
Yes.
Like it was like the dialogue that does get mirrored is like so kind of elaborate up front that you're like, well, there's no way none of this is coming back. Like, you don't have to know a whole lot about movies to catch it. And every time I think something like that is like totally overt, like how you said, like, is it annoying or something? I'll talk to somebody who's like, I did not see that coming. And I'm like, how did you not see that coming? But then I realize everybody's different on the level of analysis that the lens they're watching a movie through. And so I was like, it wasn't annoying to me, but I was like, oh, okay, this is going to come back later. I did not realize it was going to come back later, word for word.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I should have said before, for people who don't know what we're talking about mirroring. In this movie, there are certain lines of dialogue. Like, for instance, Stan says, I was made for it. At the beginning of the movie, pretty much 2-3 minutes into the movie, he's talking to Xena, who is this other mentalist, is played by Joan Blondell. She's a mentalist in the carnival, and he's the barker for her act. And they're talking about him working as a barker and him going out and talking to people and stuff. And he talks about how he really appreciates it, her helping him with his spiel. And she said something about, like, you really love this, don't you? And he says, I was made for it.
Yeah. And it's even said about him at times.
Yeah.
As people are watching him work, they're like, he was made for this.
Right.
Like, this is.
Right.
So,
by the end of the first act, you know that he was made for conning people. Basically,
Not only has he told you, but other people have told you, in case you question his credentials.
But they went and just interviewed random people who wandered into the carnival, and they're like, I think that guy was made for it.
That guy was made for this. I don't know who he is. He's also smoking hot for this carnival. I'm just going to say, like, it's a carnival.
Right. He looks like a man. They're going to have to tape his eyes down to make him ugly towards the end of a story,
exactly.
I think.
Yeah.
But and then that comes back later on when he's talking to Molly, who is another act in this carnival setup. She is Madame Electra, I think is her name.
I didn't get her act, to be honest. Like, and to the film's credit, I didn't care that I didn't know. I just assumed that she was there because she's also like totally hot for a carnival, and you're like, well, that's weird.
Yeah.
And the strongman guy kind of fit. Like, somehow they're supposed to be together. You're like, but yeah, they have the scene where he like turns the chair on, and then she has like the electricity going between her hands, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And then that's all that happens, and it says like Madame Electra on the chair, but aside from that, they're like, you get it.
Yeah.
Like,
Molly she's in this act. She's much younger. Xena is kind of portrayed as being this older mentalist, and she's kind of been around. She had been to vaudeville and had huge success with her husband, Pete, who is still with her in the act, but he is an alcoholic. And so he has to work behind the scenes now to help her. And so
no one in this movie is kind of an alcoholic.
Right.
Like, they are about to pass out in front of you, can't walk. Everyone's helping them move.
That's true.
No one is like, I had a couple drinks.
Yeah.
Like,
right. If anybody hands anybody else money in this movie, chances are they're going to get a drink somewhere.
Exactly where it's going. So anyway, sorry.
But so Molly and Stan end up getting married at pretty much strong-armed into getting married. And Molly ends up helping Stan with his mentalist routine when they leave the carnival and they start working nightclubs. And then I think it's like when he's starting to transition into being a spiritualist, he says something about, he says, I was made for it at some point.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like at the beginning when he says it, there's kind of this youthful exuberance about it, even though Tyrone Power was like 30 years old or something at this point, 35. But then when he says it in the middle, there's kind of like this arrogance to it, you know? And then, of course, at the end, when he's hit rock bottom again.
Yeah, it's just resignation.
Yeah, McGraw says, well, you know, I do have this one job that I need somebody to fill temporarily until we get a geek. And that had been set up earlier in the film.
Yeah.
So, and then Stan says, Mister, I was made for it. And it's a resignation of like, this is where I belong.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we mean by mirroring. There are mirroring of lines. There are mirroring of scenes. There are mirroring of relationships like Xena and Pete, her husband.
Yeah.
Their relationship is a foreshadowing of Molly and Stan's relationship at the end because Molly shows up at the end to save Stan from... Basically, it seems like she saves him for being a geek.
That's what it comes across in the movie, So
that's what we mean by mirroring. The first time I saw it, I didn't find it that annoying because I felt like, okay, well, this is just like a dirt road with a hell of a lot of signposts on it. You know, and I was like, okay, that's cool. You know, that's fine.
I like that.
But like,
that's good.
Probably the third time I watched it, I was kind of like, okay, well, yeah, okay.
Well, and this is the thing too. I mean, it's an older movie. So I did not expect this movie to be an hour and 50 minutes long.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this movie. But as I was watching it, I was like, yeah, this has got a ways to go still. Like, I was aware of the time.
Right.
And I think that that's one way that every time you're given some line, they're like, oh, this is going to be important later. And you're like, later when? It's like a 2-hour movie. So it almost makes you impatient when you weren't impatient before.
Right.
Because they're just saying, oh, I'll tell you later. And you're like, I swear to God, you better tell me something now.
Well, and the thing too is that like it could have been longer.
Yes. Yeah, that's the thing.
As Stan becomes a mentalist and then decides to become a spiritualist, along the way he meets this psychiatrist, Dr. Lilith Ritter, who's played by Helen Walker in spectacular fucking fashion. She's
awesome.
Excellent. And he finds out that she actually records her sessions with these rich and powerful people on acetate records. Like she has this setup where she flips a switch on her desk and in the other room, this recorder starts that actually records all of these sessions on acetate vinyl records. And so she's basically like just grabbing all this stuff up to, I don't know, blackmail or for reference. It seems like, I mean, she ends up joining and helping Stan in his con as a spiritualist so that he knows all these things that these people don't think he could possibly know. And it's all stuff that he's basically fed from her.
That's the thing. I think you're supposed to believe like that it's like, oh, this is just, they're my patients and stuff. But she is way, way too smart and savvy instantly on screen to be like, she is absolutely using this information.
And the thing about her too is that like when she first meets Stan, it's in, like I said, it was in the nightclub. And she knows that they're using a code.
Yeah.
Because basically the act is pretty simple. Stan puts on a blindfold and stands down on this stage that's in the round in the middle of this club. And then Molly will pick up something and say, can you figure out, what I'm holding? And he'll say, it's a watch or whatever. Or she'll pick up a message from someone and says, do you know what this message says? And he'll say, oh, it's from a woman who's wondering if she'll ever see her daughter again, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah.
And answer the question, and he'll be right and everything. And the code is, depending on what words Molly emphasizes, then that gives Stan the signal that this is what the thing is I'm holding, or this is what the message entails, like the ballpark. And the psychiatrist, Dr. Lilith Ritter, figures this out right away.
Oh, totally.
And so she asks a question, but then Stan actually answers her and knows that she's trying to trip him up.
Yeah.
And that's one of those scenes that if you ever watch the Criterion edition and you decide to put yourself through this Silver and Orsini commentary, I think that's one of the scenes that they look at and say, Stan does have some sort of psychic ability.
Yeah.
And look, spoiler alert, he doesn't, right? Like, he just doesn't. And I don't even think if you watch the movie, you would think that he does.
No, and because they had the code working, and he's just really good at this. He's really good at cold reading. He's really good.
Right.
He has a natural talent for that. But also, they really do drive home right at the beginning and constantly through it, and then again at the end, that people aren't super complicated.
Right. That's definitely another mirroring thing.
Yeah.
To progress through the rest of the story, it basically what happens is that Lilith and Stan work together, and then Stan decides that he wants to get this rich businessman. He wants to basically try to milk this guy for money. And then once he does that, everything's going to be done. That one final score thing that's always in these movies and almost never works out.
Yeah.
And he ends up being unmasked as a fraud when Molly goes against what Stan wanted her to do by basically being the ghost of this businessman's lost love that he's asking for forgiveness for reasons that we're never really told about in the film.
Totally.
He's unmasked. Stan ends up like pushing this business guy over and he hits his head on a tree trunk, and Stan then runs away, and basically Dr. Ritter ends up double crossing him. And so she gives him all this money for him to go on the run, but he finds out that it's all singles. And when he goes back to her and says, hey, you fucked me over, she basically tries to convince him that he's gone insane and that everything is an hallucination. And she doesn't go as far in the movie as she does in the book. In the book, she tries to convince him that like even the businessman doesn't exist,
Oh, wow.
And so he then starts to lose his mind. Like we have little hints all along whenever he becomes really panicked that he's cracking up, but here he does indeed crack up, and he retreats to the bottle, and then from there he becomes a hobo, and then he ends up working at a carny as a geek, or almost a geek, before Molly saves him right at the end. And really his guilt stems from all the way back at the beginning of the movie when he's working with Xena and Pete is an alcoholic, and Stan has promised Xena that he won't give Pete a drink, but he ends up giving Pete a drink. But it kind of works out so that he accidentally gives Pete this bottle of wood alcohol that Xena uses in her act, and Pete drinks that and dies. And then Stan feels this sense of guilt, even though it was an accident. I mean,
I do like that they didn't have him do it like on purpose, because initially that's what I thought was happening.
Right.
He was like, let's get this guy out of the picture. But you can see genuine remorse.
Yeah.
So that the establishing that guilt is good.
Well, and the great thing about Tyrone Power's performance too is that I really had to watch the movie like a second time to see if he did it on purpose or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because somebody can appear to do something on purpose, but usually in movies, especially if you're talking about the 1940s, which still, even though film had been around for a while, storytelling-wise, you're still kind of like in the infancy of storytelling in film.
Yeah.
In those movies, a lot of times you would still yet see the decision happening. So even if it's, if there's any hint of it being intentional, then they're going to basically shout it to the cheap seats with like at least a little look or something. But in watching it, like it is legitimately an accident.
Yeah, no, I think he genuinely feels empathy for this guy who's like going through withdrawals in front of him, and he's like, look, here, just don't say it's from me, like don't get caught with this.
Right.
He genuinely cares about this guy, and then that backfires.
Well, and that's the scene too where Pete, who had once been a mentalist, he sits down with the bottle and he goes through the spiel about, I see these rolling hills and this old tree and a dog and a boy running barefoot. And Stan gets sucked in and he says, oh yeah, the dog was named Jip. It was his dog.
Yeah.
And then Pete kind of laughs and says, everybody has a dog. Everybody has an old gray-haired mother.
Yeah.
Everybody ran around barefoot. And so it's set up really early by this guy who's going to die soon, that we don't know it yet, but he's going to die soon.
Yeah.
That everybody's the same, and there aren't that many moving pieces to a life.
Which is like, that's like the golden age of mentalism, because now you have the technology to look up stuff on people.
Right.
But yeah, to tell someone, I see you running around in a field, they're like, what?
Right.
I don't.
Well, it's true because, I think one thing about this film is that it is specifically anchored in the period in which it was written.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, like, you can't get out of it because now you have people's lives are nicheified, there are niches. And so if you're doing cold readings at a comic convention, then, you're having some commonality or something like that. Totally. But if you're just doing a cold reading of an audience, like, you might have more problems now than you would, definitely than you would in a time like this, when you could go through the South and like throw up a rock and somebody's had somebody die in a coal mine, or somebody's had somebody die in a farming accident or whatever. And
especially since, like, to just also speak to the time, like what carnivals were, one of my favorite things is Something Wicked This Way Comes. Like, I love Ray Bradbury and stuff. But just this concept of these things would come into town, and that was the only way people were exposed to just the weirdness of humanity. Right. And they'd go there and just gawk at people and be like, oh, and then walking in there, you're like a target, already. Right. And you're easy to work. And so, but now, like, it's so much harder to to shock people. Like, people went there to be shocked, and that was it. Yeah. And they waited until it came back again next year. Right. To get shocked. Like, so crazy.
I always feel like the tendency for people to go to these kinds of shows were that these people were going and they were looking for a distraction from these lives that they were leading that were probably really hard. Yeah. But they also are going to end up seeing somebody and they think, well, my life fucking sucks, but at least I'm not
a geek.
Yeah, I'm not the geek, Yeah. And it also, satisfies some baser instinct to see something happen and see the misfortune of others. I mean, I think our modern version of carnivals are these shows where Z-list celebrities judging talent shows, basically. I mean, that's kind of like our modern geek show in a way, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But the thing I like about this is that, especially when you hear Stan talk in the Carney, he's talking about how they're rubes. And he loves, basically getting one over on them. Yeah. And it kind of feeds into the scene where he talks to the marshal who comes to shut down the carnival. Yeah. Basically, I guess, especially in carnies that would have geeks in them or mentalist acts, the local law would come in and shut them down. And typically it was either to appease the church-going citizens of their little burg, or it was for a bribe. And so when this marshal comes to shut down the carny, Stan ends up talking him out of it by basically cold reading him.
Yeah.
And it's impressive to everybody. It's the first time that they realize that Stan's more valuable than just being a barker, that he can actually do, some really solid cold reading and convince people. And plus, he saved their asses. So
yeah, totally.
That's the time we really learn about Molly's act in the electric chair, because this marshal wants to run her in because she's scantily clad.
Yeah.
And she's basically kind of in, what is it? It's kind of like just a small top, bare midriff, and then she has shorts or, sheer pants or something on.
Yeah.
And Stan's whole thing is that, she's dealing with this electricity, and so if she had any more of a costume, there'd be a chance of it catching on fire. And then he kind of launches into this whole thing with the marshal, and he talks to the marshal about how, the marshal is beset by people who are jealous of him and don't recognize his worth and his talents. And he talks about his daughter, and he talks about all this stuff.
Yeah.
And convinces the guy to just kind of go away. He basically just kind of dizzies this marshal with this cold reading, and then just kind of sends him off with a pat on the ass, like, go with God, dipshit.
Yeah.
And in their commentary, Silver and Orsini kind of use that as another example, or as their initial example.
That he's actually psychic.
And it made me think of two things, them thinking that. The first thing that it made me think of was how people like you and I look at movies, right? So like you were saying a while ago, you could see all this mirroring, but there are other people you talk to them who are like, I never saw that coming. And you're just like, really? I think what it is we've become what I heard Orson Welles refer to as a cut eye, which is basically like this person who could do cold readings so well that they then almost forget that they're seeing the signs in a person, and they almost start to believe that they're psychic. And in turn, other people definitely believe that they're psychic.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going on with Stan, because there are times when people say, how do you do that? And he's like, I don't really know for sure.
Yeah.
And I half believe him.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about movie Stan, because the way book Stan goes about stuff is totally different, and you would definitely not believe him when he said that. We could talk about that in a minute.
Well, I'm an unashamed fan of that TV show, The Mentalist.
Yeah.
I loved that show.
Right.
And what would constantly happen in that is like, he's some kind of psychic, and he was the one who would be like, there's no such thing as psychics. He was the one who was just constantly bringing up, everybody has a dog. Everybody had and I loved the show. And so when I'm watching this, I'm like a target audience already for it. But I didn't once think he was psychic.
No.
Not once.
Well, and that surprised me coming from like film scholars, because really, even if you look at the scene with the marshal, if you look at the marshal, you can tell, yes, he's probably a deacon in his church. Yeah. He's a guy who feels beset by people who are jealous of him because he never feels appreciated at the root, because he doesn't appreciate himself and he feels bad about himself. So he assumes that other people do. The things that he's talking about, this guy would be like, if he's a deacon of the church, chances are he's married, chances are he has a child. And the way that he talked about Molly and how she was, scantily clad, it's probably a daughter. Because if he had a son, he probably would. There are all these inferences that you can make that Stan never talks about.
Absolutely.
And still come out reading them. It's just that Stan makes assumptions. He makes these leaps that just so happen to land.
I didn't ever feel that he was psychic, but I did feel like he had great instinct.
Yeah.
Which I think is everything.
Right.
He's really good at processing information in the moment and instinctually latching on to something that's going to help him.
Right.
So the cold reading and everything is cool, but it's also this survival thing where it's like, how do I use this?
Yes.
I'm using everything you're giving me.
That's a great point, because I think that's what ends up being his downfall, because the thing about Stan is that as much as he knows about everyone else around him, the one mind that he can't crack is his own.
Yeah, definitely.
So basically, the way that he gets the code that he uses for his mentalist act with Molly is from Xena and Pete. They used to have that act. And so he learns the code from Xena after Pete dies, because she needs a partner in her act to retool her act in the Carney. And so Stan's guilt kind of stems from the fact that he himself, I don't think, really knows whether he accidentally on purpose killed Pete to get him out of the way so that Xena would share the code with him. And that's what ends up driving him insane, I think, in the end, which is kind of an interesting idea. That this person could know everyone else so well and not know himself very well at all.
And it's exactly that lack of introspection and that lack of self-awareness. That's how she can just con him.
Dr. Ritter,
Dr. Ritter, totally, he's the perfect mark for her.
That's something interesting, too. Let's talk about Dr. Ritter, Lilith Ritter, really fast, because Helen Walker does not get enough screen time in this, or I guess anything else I've seen her. I've only seen her in a couple of movies, and each time I've been like, give me more, please. What's she doing? Like, can I just watch her eat dinner? Is that cool? Because I'd rather just do that.
The only thing I know her from, but I was totally, the whole time I was watching her, it was the same with Tyrone Power. I'm like, I don't really know them from other stuff, but I would totally want to see him do other stuff.
Yeah.
She's someone where you're like, she's so good. How do I not know who she is?
She has this steady, piercing gaze.
Yeah.
I don't recall her blinking in the movie.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah.
Most of the time. And the thing that's fascinating about her, I should say one aspect of her character that's really fascinating, is that she has very kind of delineated personalities. Kind of like her office. Her office is separated into kind of like a therapy room, and then there's actually an office, like an inner sanctum type of area. And her personality is kind of split up that way. You have this person who is on the surface, when she's with her patients, a very caring, attentive, a psychiatrist, as caring and attentive as most psychiatrists will be.
Yeah.
But then there's this other side of the person who records all these conversations, who is very ruthless when it comes to dealing with Stan in the end. And you realize that, like with Stan, she just learned how to merge these two personalities together in a bit of a smoother fashion to get one over on him.
Yeah.
But Helen Walker is so great that I actually believed her performance and believed that she built the bridge between these two sides of Lilith's personality in a way that was believable.
Yeah. I definitely think that how they characterize her in the film also, like her clothing is very arguably masculine.
Right.
And she is very sure of herself and stuff. She has very masculine qualities. And I don't think it's just that sort of strength of character that she has, but they sort of peg her as like someone with power. And just visually, I think that there is this sort of masculinity to her that I thought was great.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that they kind of indicate her power with the lighting in her therapy room, which if you look at it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense realistically.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But there is kind of like this lattice work that's somehow on the ceiling that I don't think we ever see, but it casts the shadow on the back wall in the therapy room in some of the scenes, and it looks like a cage that she's trapping her patients into, which is kind of what she's doing.
It's funny because I totally think that, but I was like in my own head calling out the genre constraints.
Right.
And that's where I was like, this is their noir lighting right here. Like telling you, hey, this is a noir. Because it's like with sci-fi stuff, you have to have a countdown. I love the constraints that people still kind of like work in.
Right.
The lighting is like beautiful. But that's where it's kind of like, oh, well, if you came here for a noir,
or
here's some cage on the wall.
Well, it's interesting how they blend things that are clearly studio shot with things that are shot in realistic lighting, with things that are shot in harsher lighting. Like, all these things blend together to make a cohesive look to a film. So, early on, like the opening credits, once those are over, it goes from a freeze frame of the gate to the carnival into a moving shot, and we're seeing this thing in broad daylight.
Yeah.
But then when they go backstage on Xena's little platform, she has like a little trailer with a raised stage, and there's a compartment underneath for Pete to get into and do his part of the act. And when Xena and Stan are backstage talking, there's this hard shaft of light that goes through there, and it kind of cuts into their faces, and it's like, that's classic noir lighting.
Yeah.
And of course, at the time, I don't know that they were necessarily thinking, oh, this is classic noir lighting. You know what I mean? Because when you're in the middle of a cycle of films, I don't think you necessarily know you're in the middle of a cycle of films. You know what I mean? Like, I think
totally.
At the time, they were probably thinking, oh, well, God, did you see what those fucking German expressionists did? Holy shit, like, we should do that,
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, but you do have that, but then you have the scene where the geek in the carny tries to escape. And that's a horrifying scene. I mean, like, it's a horrifying...
Also mirrored later.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is terrifying.
But the way it's shot is really fascinating, because you do have, you would think, kind of like this perfect scenario for all these jagged light and shadows and everything. And it's really not that. It's kind of soft. And, the way that kind of like light bleeds into shadow, and the way that stuff is layered together. There are shafts of light, but they're not jagged. They're blended. And so you have all these layers in this quiet carny set up in the middle of the night, and this geek's running around with some of the other roustabouts chasing him, trying to pin him down because he hasn't gotten his daily bottle of booze as payment, and he's going crazy. And it's really fascinating how the cinematography in here, you would look at some of these disparate elements and think, oh, well, a lesser cinematographer would have gone with one of these elements. Whereas the cinematographer, Lee Garms, like the way he blends these things together is pretty masterful. I mean, because the cinematography never gets in the way of the movie. And sometimes in noir, the cinematography would get in the way at times. I mean,
totally.
Not so much in like the quote unquote classic era, but in the later eras, especially like, for my money, especially in the 90s, when they really kind of were trying really hard. Some of the independent people would be like, oh, I've seen film noir, I should do that. And they would commit to everything has to be a jagged shaft of light, or everything, every hero has to wear a fedora or whatever the fuck.
Well, and it gets super annoying when everything's so dark and you can't see people's faces, and you're like, why am I watching this? I can't see anything.
So, there's got to be a reason for it.
No, I think that the mixture of styles I thought was really great. And one thing that geek running around and just the frantic aspect of it and going, what is happening? Just call back to one of our previous episodes, reminded me of Soderbergh's Kafka in the beginning, where and how can I forget that guy's name?
Edward Rabban.
Thank you, because everybody says it over and over. I'm like, how did I? But him getting attacked and killed, like, it was just so kind of frantic and just kind of had the same, I don't know, just this feel. As that was happening, I was like, oh, this reminds me of Kafka, which I think definitely Soderbergh was going for the noir thing, or that expressionism, that look.
Yes.
I don't know.
Definitely.
That's one thing that I totally was, as I was watching it, I was going, ooh, this reminds me of Kafka.
It's kind of a funny thing, too, because once you bring up Kafka, then it reminds me that, and I think we've talked a little bit about this, but that this movie is one of those movies that's a noir without a city.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because this is, this takes place mostly on dirt roads and in the carny, especially at the beginning. And then later on, we see them in nightclubs, and we see him in see them in hotels and things like that. But
yeah.
can't remember. I don't think we ever really see a city street.
Yeah.
I mean,
and there's no mention of like, okay, this is Berlin or like whatever.
Right.
Like you're just in every town, Midwest, whatever in the beginning.
Right.
No, that's a good point. I hadn't noticed that.
And yet all the crazy lighting and stuff still works because you have the Carney Yard, that has all these different like labyrinths, and then you have Dr. Ritter's office, which is a labyrinth in and of itself. I mean, there are all these different doors. There's a back way out there, that comes into play towards the end of the movie.
That is interesting too. Like the labyrinth concept I actually really like, but just you start the movie with like how you're saying in the lighting, but it is like, here's the secret box that he goes into, and here's where they're behind the stage talking and stuff. And then, it really does mirror like, here's my office where I do stuff, but here's also where I record stuff, and you have to leave, but you have to go out the back way. Like there is this whole like secret compartments basically that they show you in the beginning are there later too. They're just more refined.
Well, that's true. And, we were talking about that with Lilith a little bit earlier, how she had kind of compartmentalized her personality and it was reflected in her office.
Yeah.
And she blends that in order to put one over on Stan. But if you look at the main cast of the film, for the most part, except for maybe Molly.
Yeah.
Xena has her act.
Yeah.
And we know that what you see on the stage is not what's going on actually behind the scenes. But then she also has the tarot, which she actually does subscribe to, And so Stan, at one point, she does a tarot reading. And one of the mirroring things that keeps coming up is the idea of the hanged man.
Yeah.
Which means like, I think it means doom or death. I don't think the death card in the tarot actually means death.
No, it doesn't. And it's funny because I've paid a lot of attention to tarot because I like it as like storytelling elements.
Right.
I know that Umberto Eco did one. Italo Calvino did this book called Castle of Crossed Destinies, I think.
Right.
I'm going to totally blank on that name, but it's written just basically he used tarot cards to map out the story, like a drawing of them. And the reason why I love them, I think artistically they're great, but also it's so open to interpretation that nothing's wrong. And so the tarot stuff in this movie arguably was heavy-handed, like in a way that Ouija boards are the same way when they first pop up, and but especially for me with tarot, where it's like, oh, it's the hanged man. I'm like, that's still like, like, was it face down? And you're like, okay, come on.
Yeah.
But,
okay. Well, and it's funny because actually Gresham structures his novel like each chapter. At the beginning of each chapter, there is a tarot card.
And
it has like an explanation of it. And from what I've read, he doesn't really use it accurately. Like it's not like it really, he uses it, he kind of is very flexible in the meaning.
Yeah, well, the movie definitely is.
Yeah. And
death, when you see death, it's like basically the go-to interpretation for it most of the time is rebirth. So it's not a bad card to get.
Yeah. It's interesting because they play the death card a little bit differently in the movie, right? Like it's face down on the ground and like, oh, so the hanged man and death. I mean, death is supposed to just signal Pete's death. Although Pete was signaling his own approaching demise well enough for me as a viewer. When he was like, double-handing that big bottle of wood alcohol, I think we kind of knew,
Oh my God, yeah. You're just like, I get it. He was in the way, and you're like, at a certain point, this guy's gone. Like, there's no movie if this guy stays. So done.
Right.
But yeah, the death card, and you're like,
yeah, okay.
But it's dramatic because it's also the same. I mean, at that point, a lot of people in the theater had never really paid any attention to tarot cards, or they have an immediate occult reaction, and so it serves a purpose as a prop. And
that's kind of an interesting point. I mean, I think the thing that fascinated me was the fact that at first you feel like there's this delineation between the rubes and the performers, but then you get behind the scenes and you realize, oh wait, there is some of this stuff that someone like Xena will consider to be legitimate. And then Stan tries to blow it off, but then as he goes on, Stan feels like he's being haunted by something, by this guilt, and he can't really put it into a box. And so arguably, I would say that you have these characters who are trying to take these dual personalities and blend them together. And it feels like probably like Stan and especially Molly are the two that are the least adept at it.
Yeah.
Because Stan doesn't even know who he is as a person, I don't think.
No, I don't think so either.
At least not the movie version of him, I would say.
No, I mean, having not read the book, I'm like, just movie Stan is like his only validation is feeling superior to people. But there's no way he's examined that at all, because he's working off of survival and what works for him. And like, so again, perfect target for a competent psychoanalyst, femme fatale figure, however you want to phrase her. I do like the separation of the rooms. I like there's the stage where the act happens and then all the stuff backstage. But like her office with the couch and everything is just her stage. It's just a stage for one person. But it's a stage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it kind of made me think too about the con of the film on the viewer, right? So we're looking at it and we think we're being told this certain story. Like I said a while ago, like I had to go back and watch it again to see if Stan had actually intentionally killed Pete or not. I think that there's a little bit of sleight of hand in a way in the film that kind of in some ways makes you as a viewer think, oh, well, this is just kind of a dark story that doesn't have a lot behind it.
Yeah.
Until you go back and start examining the various parts of the act and you say, oh, this is the part of the film where they did this. Just like you would say, this is the part where the magician taps something in his foot and he gets a signal and he knows such and such is going to happen. I mean, like there seems to be more there than you would think.
True.
But yet I do think that there is kind of thematically a little bit of misdirection in the way that the movie shakes out, because I feel like the ending of the film is troublesome for me just because it's too bright, honestly. And it's tacked on to the story, and you can feel that it's tacked on to the story because it's not in the book. And, basically once he becomes the geek, then he goes on his rampage, just like the other geek does, because in the movie, he's realizing, holy fuck, I'm going to have to bite the heads off of chickens, and he's losing his shit until Molly, who just happens to be working in the same carnival, again, finds him as like, okay, I'm going to take care of you. It feels tacked on. It is tacked on. But then the very ending, the very last line of the movie is from the new carny boss, McGraw, who says that, well, that used to be the great Stanton, huh? And they were like, what? And one of the guys is like, what happened to him? And this McGraw is like, he reached too high. And to me, that's like a fundamentally, I'm going to... Let me put on my Che Guevara t-shirt. To me, that's like a fundamentally capitalist assessment of this guy who basically, like, when he's in the carny doing it to poor people, it's okay. But the second that he turns this thing around and turns it on a rich person, then suddenly he deserves to have a downfall where he becomes a geek. And I know that that's not that's a simplistic view of it, in that that's one facet of it. There's also the idea that, the religious aspect of it, that he tried to become a guru and basically he's paying for his sin of trying to fool people into thinking that he was some sort of conduit to God or whatever.
Yeah, this false prophet thing.
Exactly. So, I understand that that's there, but at the same time, it's kind of like the ultimate message of the movie is kind of like know your place in a way. Kind of like know that if you're, a poor carny, you should just stay being a poor carny. And that's what you should do, because if you try to go up there and bilk people out of money who actually have a lot of money, then it becomes a crime.
Well, it's funny, and that's a good point, because like he started the movie being like, oh man, at least I'm not a geek like that guy.
Right.
Like if he just stayed happy with his life, because he loved it.
Right.
He loved that life. Then arguably he's at the end of there'd be no movie, but like he just would have lived a life having at least that guy to feel superior to.
Right.
And that should have been enough, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, the second he crosses the rich people or tries to rise above his station, so to speak, he gets schooled.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. Like part of it is Lilith, like basically, taking him to the cleaners. But part of it too is one of these things where it's kind of hard to say, because I have family members who are in the ministry. And I feel like they do so much good for the world. And if churches at large, like writ large, were like them, then the church would be a fundamentally good institution and would be a fundamentally different institution than what it is, across most Western denominations.
Yeah.
But I, in a way, like watching this movie, I kind of feel like, how do I say, God, it's hard to say this because, like I feel like I'm working at Fox in 1946, like people writing in going, this is disrespectful to religion, which actually happened with this movie when they were making it.
Yeah.
But I just feel like, okay, so Stan is basically doing what a lot of these like higher up preachers will do, the preachers who like the Norman Vincent Peales of the world, who kind of cater to the rich, Stan's basically doing the same thing that those people are doing, except he goes the extra step further and tries to make shit actually happen.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. The fact that he actually reaches over and says, well, let's give them more bang for their buck here. Let's actually try to make something happen. And that's where he gets dinged and knocked back down. I mean, arguably, I don't know. I kind of feel like in the end, I don't like Stan as a person, because you would always have to have your wallet in your front pocket around him,
Yeah, totally.
But at the same time, I'm kind of like, the only thing that he's doing beyond what a lot of those other Joel Osteens of the world, let's say, is that he is actually trying to create miracles, and not just talk about them as some distant thing.
So you're saying that the spook game isn't isolated just to carnivals. That's what I could not agree more. I could not agree more, because I have not a great relationship with religion. I grew up religious, but at a very specific point was like, this isn't for me. But the family members that are still super religious, it is great for them. Right. And I would never want them not to have the comfort that gives them. It doesn't give me anything. Right. But I don't want it to disappear. I just do wish it was more genuinely about what it says it's about all the time. That would be great. Right. That would be awesome. Right. And like you said, there are people involved in there that are amazing, and that's their goal. Yeah. So, but that's not everybody. And it is like an elaborate spook game, like from what you're talking about. You knew it was problematic once he's like, look, I just need to make a ghost real for this guy. You're like, and then you hire someone. You do not use your girlfriend who is already way uncomfortable with you going against God. How did he think that was going to go?
Oh man, I'm telling you, Aaron, in the book, it's so much worse. Like, see, the thing about the book is that if we can, I want to segue into talking about the differences between the book and the movie, because
I think that's a good spot, because I think we just ended the movie. Although I will say this before we tie off, like having not read the book and not knowing anything about the movie, I 100% thought that he was going to kill Molly. Yeah. Like blind rage, kill Molly, not know what he did, and it was just going to make it so much worse for him.
Right.
So when it's like, oh, I'll be with you, and mirroring Xena and Pete's relationship,
right,
I was like, ah,
yeah.
But I was actively kind of happy that he didn't kill her, but I was like, oh, I fully expected him to beat her with that bar he was holding, or whatever, like,
yeah,
to be that far gone. But then it was like, oh, salvation. I'm like, how did he earn that? What did he do to earn that?
Right. Exactly. Because basically he pretty much then at the end, he's being taken care of by his wife. Like, easiest fucking job in the carnival. And
absolutely.
So in the book, it's different because the book version of Stan, and I should say this before we talk about the book.
Okay.
The reason that I think it's important to talk about the differences between the book and the movie is that to help people either pregame for Del Toro's movie, or it might offer something to inform maybe their own post-game analysis of his movie.
Which is what I'm hoping. I'm hoping people come post-game, because there's no way that this stuff you're about to talk about with the book is not going to be... Del Toro's going to make a darker, more appropriate movie. That's just the reality.
Right. Because he's got fewer constraints.
It's not 1944.
Right.
and he's Del Toro. Like,
right.
So,
So in the book, what happens with Stan and Molly is more involved. I mean, overall, the book is just more involved. So in the movie, we never see the stuff that Stan does as far as like seances and things like that to actually convince these rich people that he is some sort of like guru, prophet, minister type thing.
Yeah.
But in the book, there are like these very involved sessions where Molly is in like this little niche in a room in a woman's mansion. And, you know, they turn out the lights except for this one red lantern. And he makes all this stuff happen because he has kind of rigged things up the way that spiritualists would do. And so in the movie, you have, what's her name? Addie Peabody, I think is her name, this older woman that, he kind of like gains her confidence. And she, you know, I think he refers to something at one point about how like she gave him a church or was going to build him a church or something like that.
Yeah.
In the book, it's her house. Like he convinces her that her daughter is talking to her from the grave, her daughter who died when she was very young. And her daughter wants her to go to California and leave him with this mansion to be his church. So this Addie Peabody leaves, and so he has this church, and now that he has this mansion church, he can rig it up with all the stuff that he needs, and so he goes through and rigs it up. And
so he gets her to leave the house?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
She leaves the house to him and moves out. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think he passes her off to this other spiritualist out in California that can then kind of keep things going a little bit. But there's, you know, the thing about the book that's fascinating but also frustrating is that Gresham it's not like he really sticks with one character all the time. So you're like at first in the carny, you're jumping into the minds of all the characters of what they're thinking as they're performing. And they're thinking about mundane stuff. Like Bruno's thinking about like, will Molly ever look at me while he's lifting a medicine ball or whatever the fuck?
Yeah.
But like with Mrs. Peabody, he actually has this like probably chapter, I guess, where she is hearing things in her house at night. You know, and she thinks that it's her daughter and all this kind of stuff. But in a roundabout way, you figure out that it's Stan.
Wow.
And so Stan and Molly are pretending to live somewhere else, like in a nice house or whatever. But in reality, they live in like a boarding house that's really close. So Stan can come over at night and do things around the outside of the house and sneak in to make,
awesome.
You know, so there's a lot of, it's much more elaborate.
Yeah.
And with Molly, what happens is that she does have the same protest that she does in the film of, you know, him going against God, and she doesn't feel comfortable with it and all this stuff. But he convinces her to go further with Grendel, and Grendel is the rich man, obviously, from the film, Ezra Grendel.
What a name, too.
Yeah, it's a great name. That's an old school Frank Capra type name.
Yeah, exactly.
But so with Grendel, in the movie, we never really know exactly what he's asking the ghost of his lost love forgiveness for.
Yeah, no, they don't say anything. She's dead and he never got over it.
Right,
like, that's what basically it.
Yeah, and it sounds like she died young. In the book, they do talk about how like she did die young, and she died young of a botched abortion that he forced upon her.
Ooh, yeah.
And so there's a whole thing about him asking for forgiveness, and the reason that Stan decides that he wants to manifest the ghost of Dory, which is this woman's name, and have Grendel ask for forgiveness is because he feels like then Grendel will feel this eternal debt to him.
Yeah.
And the whole goal for Stan is to score this $150,000 from Grendel, which today's money would be like about $1.5–2 million.
Yeah.
And he basically convinces Molly to help him by saying, once I'm done, then that's it. We're gone. But in reality, he had planned to leave Molly behind all along and go with Lilith. Because in the book, Lilith is a much bigger character, and she is actually absolutely the one driving the entire con.
Nice.
And so she says at one point, like, I was going to give Grendel over to one of my Freudian friends, but instead I think maybe if I give him to you, we can work with that. And I want to talk about Lilith here in a second.
Okay.
But before that, I want to get to what Stan does to Molly. So instead of having Molly like walk around out in a quiet wood in an old-fashioned dress, like a Victorian dress or whatever, far away from Grendel, what happens is Stan gets Grendel to basically kind of drop out of his life for a couple of days. And it's just kind of out of nowhere. And Grendel is living then at the mansion/church with Stan for a few days. And Stan kind of gives him this sedative to put him in this twilight state.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And so in the book, Stan, I think, convinces himself that Grendel wants to ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
But in reality, Grendel wants to have, as our friend Ryan would say, dirty sex with Dory one last time.
Ghost.
Yeah. And Stan, to that end, decides that he's basically going to pimp Molly out. That he has her like come on like the ghost, and she is nude, and Grendel is like in a robe with nothing on under it. And he doesn't really know exactly what's going on,
Yeah.
Because he's kind of sedate. But then once he sees her in the darkness, in this kind of spiritualist getup, then, he goes after her and grabs her, and that's when she breaks the whole deal and says...
See, that makes so much more sense than what happened in the movie.
Yeah, well, and Stan goes...
But it's also super dark, so I can totally see why.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's no way they would have filmed this in like the Hays Code era. But, then Stan does knock out Grendel, but he also knocks Molly out and just leaves her there.
Oh.
And it's not because... I think it's not because he's angry that Grendel goes after Molly. It's because he's angry that he was so close to finishing this con up and she fucked it up. And so he hits her, and both she and Grendel end up living, but like Stan doesn't give her any money. He doesn't say, I'll see you again. He just leaves her. They just never see each other ever again.
Wow.
And Gresham puts in like a short chapter that kind of talks about her life afterwards, and how she, it's just this little scene about going to the racetrack and how her husband and their son like go to the track, and she really loves her husband and everything.
That's a weird thing to have in the book, though. Just that.
Well, it is. Well, it makes more sense, though, when like the Molly in the book and the Stan in the book, they have really big parent issues.
Huh.
So, I know that when we did some pre-roll on the show, you were talking about like, I don't know if the background like that might sidetrack us, and I agree with that. It's just that to understand how the story really shakes out in the book, it's more about like Stan has kind of like this Oedipal thing going on with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And then Molly has this really, really super deep love for her dead father. And it's to the point that she remarks how Stan was just like her dad.
Yeah.
And then like her husband in the end, or near the end of the book, is like her father too, because her father would always go to the racetrack. He could always talk their way out of anything. You know, it was just this kind of thing where she's just trying to marry somebody like dear old dad.
Yeah.
And her dad always wanted her to get into show business. And so when Stan took her into the mentalist thing and got her into the act, you know, she was in show business. With Stan, the thing that is important to know is that the Oedipal thing kind of comes from the fact that he and his mother had a bond. You know, they had this little place out in the woods that was like this clearing, and she was like, this is our special place, and yada, yada, yada. But then one day his mother doesn't come home when she's supposed to, and he goes out to this little place in the woods and sees her having sex with a man that's not his father. And so he develops this weird kind of Oedipal jealousy of the guy that she was cheating on the father with. Yeah. And his mother and this guy end up going away, like running away together, I think.
Wow.
And so then Stan leaves home, and there's a whole section in the book that once he becomes like this preacher or whatever, or this minister or whatever he calls himself, he goes back home because he hears that his father's dying. And it's almost like he's trying to make amends, but his dad is still kind of on his ass because he and his dad always clashed. And so it ends up being kind of a final fuck you to the old man.
Yeah.
And what happens then is that Lilith figures out this whole Oedipal thing, and she uses it to basically enslave Stan.
That makes perfect sense.
He becomes so enamored with her that she is like having him paint her toenails while he is naked, you know, like just crazy stuff, you know, like not crazy stuff. Like that's not crazy, but you know what I mean? Like
no
just
kink shaming here.
Yeah, right. It's just like out of the ordinary stuff. And so that's like, she's kind of the one who floats the idea, I think, of him pimping Molly out in a sense.
That makes perfect sense. I don't see how Del Toro won't work with this stuff, because with the original, they really could have used some more scenes showing her kind of get more of a stranglehold on him.
Right.
Or just to show that she's behind a lot more, because it's a wasted opportunity for her as an actress.
It really is. You know, that dock scene where she says something about them going to the boat club on her boat there, like her little speedboat, and he says, you know, we shouldn't be seen together and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like in the book, that's reversed. In the book, he's the one that wants to be around her all the time, and she's like, no, dipshit.
That's so much better.
Yeah.
That's so much better.
But the other thing you have to figure in, and this is something I really wanted to talk about because I'll be curious to see how this is handled in Del Toro's film.
Yeah.
In the book, Stan is much younger when the book starts. Stan is like late teens, 20. And like in the Goulding movie, he and Xena share a kiss, but Stan's an older guy. Like he's kind of portrayed with youthful exuberance, but he's clearly like 30, 35, like we were saying.
Totally.
But he and Xena share that kiss in the hotel room at one point, and then we're kind of led to believe that they have some sort of relationship, even though we don't see anything else until after he talks to the marshal and kind of cold reads that guy and gets him out of the park. And then it's kind of intimated that Stan and Molly, they have sex.
Yeah.
And it's kind of vaguely hinted at in the film. And then once they do that, they go to meet up with the rest of the carny, and Bruno and Xena figure out that Stan and Molly are together, and Bruno literally puts a chokehold on Stan until he agrees to marry Molly.
And then they cut to a scene where they're in a room talking about how they're married.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and in the book, they don't, let me see, in the book, there is talk about that stuff, but I don't know that they ever actually get married. I can't remember. I don't think they actually ever really get married. But Xena does not come off as jealous in the book as she does in the film. And the jealousy that she kind of has, Joan Blondell is really good at kind of playing this flash of jealousy that then she diverts into this faux happiness for them.
Yeah.
That I think is really great because she was good at like hinting that, oh, he and I had a much deeper relationship and I'm really hurt by this, but I'm going to pretend not to be.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like in the book, Xena actually takes Stan's virginity. So it's
nice.
like a totally different, again, kind of an Oedipal thing because she's, significantly older than he is in the book. In the movie, that difference isn't quite as vast, even though they try to portray it that way. But I think Joan Blondell might have been the same age or maybe younger than Tyrone Power when the movie was made.
That's funny.
So she was just suffering under the Hollywood horseshit of, you're in your 30s. Now you have to become,
you're
matronly minor characters. Yeah, it's bullshit.
It's terrible.
So, yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see how Del Toro kind of deals with the age thing, because if he's casting Bradley Cooper, I kind of feel like he's doing the same thing, like maybe aging the story up a little bit, which is not, I mean, I can understand it, but at the same time, like it does kind of change the lens that you look at this through,
Yeah.
If you see a kid losing his virginity to an older woman and realize the baggage that has, knowing his backstory with his mother, that's different than having like a guy who's in his 30s, almost 40, and still dealing with Oedipal issues. You're kind of like, if you don't kind of see the seed of that, in a way, it's kind of like, fuck, dude, get your shit together. You're like, what's wrong with you?
But God, I can't wait to see Cate Blanchett work this character.
She's going to murder it. I mean, she's just going to absolutely kill it.
And also Toni Collette being Xena.
Yeah.
Just that. I'm like, well then, yeah. I can't wait. Because, man, Cate Blanchett's going to kill it.
I mean, you think you got Blanchett, Collette, Rooney Mara.
David Strathairn is Pete.
Oh my God.
Richard Jenkins. Like, there is no wasted spot on that cast list.
You see, I know you and I diverge on Cooper.
For me, Bradley Cooper is just fun to watch. Like, he can work a character pretty well, but also I love like a lot of the things that are kind of more throwaway, like the A-Team movie with Liam Neeson and Bradley Cooper. I love that movie. Charlton Copley as Murdoch makes me very happy. But I think that his dramatic side is something that he doesn't get to use a lot.
Yeah.
Silver Linings Playbook is a movie that's kind of important to me, being bipolar. I'm like, hey, look, this is a great story. I'm like, I thought he was great in that. I think that he can shine. I think that he just has to have the right stuff to work with. He's one of the people who's, I guess, more captivating to me, but also was kind of a Bear Grylls guy on like some channel and just was doing that sort of stuff and then somehow rose up and then became Bradley Cooper. And I don't know why I'm kind of like, I just kind of like that about him.
Yeah, I feel like, and it's been a long time since I've seen Silver Linings Playbook. I mean, I think I saw it probably when it came out. I think with him, the thing that bothers me is that he's one of those people that I always feel like I can see the gears turning. You know what I mean? And so for me, it's kind of like, I think I've said this on the show before. It's kind of like, I don't want to see the gears of the watch. I want the watch to tell me the time, And I know I'm probably in the minority on this, but I hated A Star Is Born. I hated it. I was like, it seems like he's doing an impression of Eddie Vedder, but like a shitty singer. And I found out later that he like followed Eddie Vedder around. And I'm just like, come on, dude. Like I feel like sometimes Bradley Cooper is trying to be Clint Eastwood, but without like, say, the charisma, and well, I think he has better acting chops than Clint Eastwood, probably on balance, but I don't feel like he has the necessarily the charisma of Eastwood that's translatable across a bunch of different types of tough guy characters.
I totally can agree with that. Star Is Born, I was kind of like, okay, like my favorite part of A Star Is Born is Sam Elliott. So I
Well,
was just
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, well, I'm already going to watch. I thought Lady Gaga did a great job.
Yeah.
I think she's a much better actress than people give her credit for.
Yeah.
Her American Horror Story stuff is great. But yeah, it just,
that was,
but I'm also not like, that's the kind of movie where you're like, okay, you're telling me how I'm going to feel. Like,
Yeah.
that's just,
yeah, right. Exactly.
So,
well, and you're telling me how I'm going to feel, and you're not even doing it in a subtle way. You're not doing it in a Stan Carlisle kind of way. You're doing it in
point.
kind of like Steven Spielberg in an off-film kind of way. You know,
yeah,
kind of like, you know, you're doing it like Steven Spielberg looks like he's going to do in a West Side Story.
West Side Story. That's exactly what I thought.
You know, I mean, it's like, and that's the thing. Like, I agree with you. Lady Gaga was actually one of the better parts of that film for me. Sam Elliott is Sam Elliott, and if you don't know what that means, then go watch some Sam Elliott movies, you know?
Oh my God, watch them all.
He makes everything better. Everything. But to me, Stan Carlisle kind of demands this actor who, again, can blend these different sides of a personality for us, but still yet not know himself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Bradley Cooper has that.
I have high hopes, I will say.
I am fully ready to be proven completely and totally wrong.
I think it's also this, though. I think that Bradley Cooper is one of those guys who can rise to the challenge. Like, the scenes with him and Sam Elliott in Stars Born are the best parts to me.
Right.
But you put him working off of this cast, and I think he elevates.
I hope so.
Because I think it's the 18. I thought he elevated pretty well with Liam Neeson and Charlton Copley.
Yeah.
Like,
you know, I feel like I heard a little bit of an accent from him in the trailer, and I'm just like, oh, fuck, don't give him an accent.
I'm with you. Don't give him an accent.
Because when you give him an accent or he takes on some sort of vocal affectation.
Yeah.
To me, it feels like he fixates on that at the expense of other parts of his performance.
The second that you said accent, I totally understand your concept of seeing the gears turning.
Yeah.
Because you're like, he's doing an accent.
Right.
And that's with so many actors and actresses. They're just, once they're doing an accent, I'm watching the whole time going, they're keeping this accent up pretty well. Or they're like, oh, it slipped right there, but I'm aware the entire time.
Yes.
On some level, I wish accents would just go away, because I get it. You're in Russia. Okay, cool. Like, but I don't know. Like, I don't know.
I mean, the thing too is that, like, it takes a really, really adept, talented, supremely charismatic actor to, like, take an accent and bake it into a character that's really fully formed. Yeah. And I am not an actor, and Bradley Cooper is now and will always be a better actor than I am. And yet I still say that, like, if you just let this guy go without this yokel accent, I think he has, like, let's do numbers. I'm not a numbers guy, but let's do numbers. I think he has like a 57% chance of having a better performance if you take away the accent. I just think that he elevates automatically, you know.
I would agree with that, but I think that for so many people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I agree with that.
Just stop.
Yeah.
Like, we know that's not you.
Right.
And I don't know. And it's weird when it's like, I don't know, here's your Russian accent. Here's your British accent. You now alienated the country that because they're watching it going, why? You call that an accent? Like, you immediately pissed off.
Right.
I've never understood it. Like, I don't know.
It's gonna be interesting though too to see if they try to have Cooper play across a wide range of ages, because the book's frustrating because, like I said, it jumps around as far as like who it focuses on, but it's also like at times intentionally obscure. So, like, for instance, let's just talk about like the Grendel thing, right? Like with Ezra Grendel and Dory, that whole backstory, there's this whole thing where it's like there's no doubt that Stan is not a psychic, because there's a whole section of the book where he goes off to the city to investigate Grendel's past. And in that, though, there are times when you can't tell if Stan is even in the fucking room because Gresham just refers to him in obscure terms, like the blue eyes did this or the blonde-haired man did this. And because he's playing this part, like he goes to the morgue and he's playing the part of like somebody's buddy who's showing up to talk to him while he's working. And he goes to Dory's family's house and he's playing like a government census taker or something like that, like trying to get information. And Gresham plays that stuff very obscure. And then he also is kind of that way with the timeline of the entire story. But it feels like it takes place over about probably like maybe 10, 15 years. And 15 years between like 20 and 35. There's some big stuff going on there, or 20 years between like late teens and mid 30s.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about a fundamentally different story than if you're talking about somebody going from like 55 to 70.
Totally.
It's evolutionary versus revolutionary, you know?
Yeah, totally.
So I'll just be interested to see if he does that, because I'd almost rather see Stan like be played by a couple different characters if they're going to do the whole saga. But from what I've heard Del Toro say, he's not really going to do the whole book. Because he said it was too big. I mean, I'll see it. I'm worried. You know, because I enjoyed the book and I enjoyed this first adaptation. So I have to be sold on Del Toro, I think, as the director to do it. You know,
I love Del Toro, and I think it's odd that he's doing this, and I feel okay saying that because I'm gonna see it, and I'm definitely positive that I'm not gonna walk out with anything good. Like that's just not. He can't make something that I'm going, there is nothing good in this. Like, that's not even possible.
Right.
But I just think it's an odd choice. But I'm hopeful because I think the darkness that you're talking about that's in the book, man, I think he'll be able to put that across in a way. I'm looking forward to it. I'm also just really happy that Jim Beaver is in it. Like, I love him from Supernatural. Like, he's playing the sheriff. So he doesn't have a huge part, but he's going to bring some life to just that sheriff part. So he stacked that deck. Ron Perlman is Bruno.
Yeah. That's going to be weird to see him and Rooney Mara. Like,
that's just going to be weird.
It's going to be weird.
Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. I have superficial concerns, like if Lilith, you know, Cate Blanchett, when they show shots of her, she looks like she's in her office. Like, her office is awful brown, Aaron, and I'm concerned about it. You know, I'm concerned about certain things. I'm concerned that it's going to be a little shiny. I think that's one thing that kind of grates on me, because I feel like if you do like a street level adaptation of this novel, you're going to come away with something that people are going to go, holy fuck, that's weird. And holy fuck, I really want to see that again. And sometimes with Del Toro, when he does some of this stuff, it gets a little shiny for my taste, you know, just kind of the sheen that's on it. And it's not just him. A lot of directors and cinematographers tend to do this, especially nowadays. If you know, if you're in the 70s, it's tinted kind of yellow, you know. If you're in the 50s, it's all shiny and it's mostly like pastels and chrome, you know. And so I kind of worry about that, you know. I don't know.
Well, it's funny. I immediately think, like, if you're Soderbergh, you can do 3-in-1. And so you can try and tell different times by the tint.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But you know, like, if you look at it, he's a prime example. If you look at his latest film, No Sudden Move, or one of his latest films.
Oh yeah.
And it's a noir. It takes place in like the 50s in Detroit. It is kind of like, it's not like Out of Sight Gunmetal Blue, but it's you know, it's got a little bit of a blue tint to it. Plus he used like this wide angle lens that's almost like fisheye, so it kind of curves at the edges because this is a specific type of lens. And he said they ended up using it most of the time, so it almost looks like you're looking at it through like an old telescope or something like that, or maybe looking into a snow globe. So I mean, but at the same time, that 1950s Detroit, it felt lived in. It felt real, you know?
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like when filmmakers skew more towards the sheen of something because they want their work to look the way they want it to look, and that's fine. But sometimes I feel like, for me, it takes me out of the story. But in the end, like, it could be a case of, again, me being kind of a cut-eye when it comes to movies. Like, I look at it, I see all these things, and other people go, I don't fucking give a shit about that. What are you talking about?
They're like, I didn't see it coming.
Yeah, right.
What?
Who gives a fuck if her office is brown? Well, you know, I mean.
I totally get it. Yeah, I do think we're going to be watching this on a different critical level. Because we've already now talked for a while about the movie it's based on that before I had no idea existed. So I think a lot of people going in there are just like, oh, this is a new Del Toro thing. And they'll have no concept.
Right.
This was like, they'll see based on a book by, and they'll be like, okay.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. The name of the movie is Nightmare Alley, obviously. And in the film, they never talk about what Nightmare Alley really is. Right.
I have no idea what Nightmare Alley is.
In the book, Stan has this, in his dreams, he's in an alley. And somebody is running after him, trying to get him, like trying to...
Again, the beginning of Kafka.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. The beginning of Kafka, basically.
Yeah, it's so weird.
So there are two things here. Number one, I mean, in the book, it plays into things because in his downfall, he's paranoid because he thinks that Grendel is so powerful that he's going to have people chasing him all over the country. The reason he becomes a hobo is to hide from him. And because there's a whole sidetrack in the book where he does this thing where he tries to do readings for people as they're coming out of the movie theater or something. And he's kind of a vagrant. And so this cop picks him up, and the cop's like, oh, I've seen you before. I told you to get out of town, but you didn't do it. And so he ends up like getting away from this cop, and the cop catches up to him in this alley, and he beats the cop to death.
Oh.
And so before then, he had all of these dreams about this alley and his, his nightmares, that he's running towards this light at the end and somebody's trying to get him. And then it's kind of recreated in this scene.
That's interesting.
So I don't, obviously it looks like from the trailer, obviously it's like trying to read tea leaves here, but in the trailer, it does kind of look like that they're going to deal with that somewhat. My question to you is like, do you have an alley in your dreams? Like, do you ever have nightmares like with
an alley? No.
Okay. Because I do. And when I read that in Gresham's book, I was like, holy fuck. Like,
that's funny.
Other people have that. Like, I have this one dream where I go to this bus station, and it's in this city that is like a version of a city I've been to, but like it's not that city,
Yeah.
I go to this bus station, and as I'm going to the bus station, I keep having to go through these different gates at different intervals and present my ticket, and it's punched or whatever. I just keep going. And the bus station gets shabbier and shabbier and shabbier. Until I realize at the end that I have to go through this gate and go down this alley. And the alley is basically kind of like this cement tunnel, pretty much, with an overgrowth of greenery and stuff over the top and kind of coming down. And there are all these dark doorways all the way down through the alley. And I know that there are people waiting in there to jump out at me as I go. And sometimes I just evade them. Sometimes I have to fight with them. Sometimes they're just not there at all. Sometimes they're in the darkness and they say something, there's all these different permutations of the dream. But when I read in this book that he had that dream, I was like, fuck, no kidding. Like, I have that dream.
See the short film of your dream.
Yeah, right. No,
that would be.
No, when you bash people's heads in the concrete in my dreams, like they bleed rainbows. It's really weird. It doesn't quite work.
That does not make me not want to see this. I 100% more want to see this movie.
It has to be directed by Michael Bay, and like a car has to turn into a robot. That's going to be my rule.
That would be awesome. My nightmares are so much more mundane because like they're really affecting, but they're like rooms I've been in.
Right.
And everything seems normal. And then it's just through conversation, things just get so wrong. And I'm always able to just stop and notice. I guess I'm a cut eye in my own dreams. And I'm like, none of this is like, it gets Inception level where you're like, that rug is wrong or something, you know, and then I can kind of take control. But it's the nightmare for me is the not knowing if this is real or because I hate it and I don't want this to be real.
Right.
And then I'm convinced that it is real. And then I wake up and I'm like, wah.
Yeah.
Like that's
that's
what it is.
Yeah.
So that's more of a nightmare for me. Like I don't really have the I'm in an abandoned farm or something like that. Like for me it's like I'm in the room that I'm always in. Yeah. And then I really don't want this to be really happening. And then it's always that I think there's no way around it. This is real and great.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, wait. And then I wake up and I'm like, ugh. And then I never want to sleep again.
It's interesting though. Yeah, it's interesting though, like how, and I know we're totally going off the tracks, but I don't give a fuck. It's totally interesting though how people, like, their minds present to them, you know, this is your idea of a bad time. You know what I mean? Like, this is your idea of a shitty night at the office. But for me, it's kind of like I have the town where I went to college. I have a version of that, but it's bigger and dirtier and different. But I still,
it's like all Lovecraftian dirty, or like,
it's just it's grimier.
Yeah, nice.
I have like the version of the city that's nearest me, you know, but it's not that city. It's just this city. And then I have a version of Dayton, Ohio. I have no idea why.
Huh.
And the version of Dayton, Ohio is like every time I'm there, it's bigger. Like the city's bigger, but then the suburbs are also bigger. And Guided by Voices, that band, they're always chasing me with Uzis all over the place. And, you know, Bob Pollard always has a head injury that he covers up with a red, white, and blue bandana. And he has mirror sunglasses on and always an Uzi. You know, it's always so weird.
Oh, I guarantee that's like a pitch for a video for them.
Right. Well, the other thing too about my dream version of Dayton for some reason is that there are these little mom and pop appliance stores, and they have locations throughout the city, and most of the time they're kind of out in the suburbs and the buildings are by themselves. But if you go into the appliance shop and you go to the back and you climb on top of a washer and get up in the drop ceiling, when you climb up in there, you will come out at one of the other locations of this mom and pop place on the other side of the city. It's like a little portal.
Is awesome. What's funny is in Ohio, the only place I've been a bunch of times is Dayton, Ohio.
Oh, really?
Because I've been a Neil Gaiman fan for a long time, and he would do like small book signings early on. And
right.
But he went to this one bookstore in Dayton at least 3 times. I drove out to see him that's funny. But the only place in Ohio, all the places that like it could be, the only place I'm like, oh, I know Dayton, and Cincinnati, but that doesn't count because it's Cincinnati.
Yeah,
but it's its own thing. Cincinnati's its own thing.
I like Dayton. I
like it too. It was neat.
So overall, let's to go away from stuff that'll be up on the cutting room floor. What did you think of the movie overall?
For something that I had never heard of, and also ashamedly not being really aware of Tyrone Power at all.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it, and we both have this love for noir stuff. Like normally, that's enough to be like, oh, okay, well, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
But I genuinely love this movie. I think the one thing I cannot get over at all is like how Stanton didn't expect that Lilith was just conning him.
Right.
But from what you've said about the book, it totally makes more sense. I wish some of the was in there. But for the movie as a standalone, it's annoyingly mirrored. That is a good word to use for it.
Yeah.
But I thought it was great. And it's very timely for that period to be like, oh, here's the cautionary tale of this.
Right.
But Tyrone Power was great.
Yeah.
Everyone in it was great. But Tyrone Power and Helen Walker were great.
Yeah.
And I am amazed that I hadn't heard of it. I'm more amazed that when you brought up the nightmare stuff that I hadn't even wondered what the title meant.
Yeah.
I'm a little sad that I didn't get hung up on that.
Yeah.
Like, where's the Nightmare Alley?
Yeah. Yeah. I loved it too. And I will suggest to people, if you're going to either pick up the Criterion disc, or this is on the Criterion channel right now as like one of the collection titles, which means that you get not only the movie, but you get all of the special features that go with it that you would get on the Blu-ray or whatever, or the DVD.
Yeah.
If you're going to watch it, I would definitely also suggest watching the Imogen Sarah Smith featurette where she talks about the film, because she's utterly fucking brilliant.
Yes.
She has a book so good. It's called In Lonely Places, and it's about films noir that take place outside of cities for the most part. She's brilliant. I cannot remember the name of the gentleman who they have that feature. It's an interview with him talking about carnivals.
Yeah, me neither.
That's really good. There's an interview with Colleen Gray, who played Molly, and I don't know when that interview took place, but it was she died in like 2015, so I think obviously it took place before that. Either that or Stan Carlisle got involved, and it was a seance. But that's really good. The Orsini and James Orsini and Alan Silver, their commentary, skip that shit.
Oh, it sounds great so far. I'm thinking that he's psychic, where you're like, what?
Oh my God. I mean, and they just, you know what? Like, I think that commentary, I texted, it might've been you. I texted a couple people. I was like, these dudes were over each other's shit by the time 2005 rolled around.
No, that's what you were telling me. And I'm like, well, that's something I don't have to watch now.
Those guys were arguing about what instruments are being played in the soundtrack in the background of a scene, or, you know, just like, you know, one guy would notice something, the other guy would be like, oh, you didn't notice that or whatever. It's just like, come on, like, give us information, and give us information that seems like you've seen the movie more than once, you know, like, and they probably had, but, you know, sometimes it gets to a point where it's like, all right. I mean, we talked about this before we started recording, like, up to the point now where I'm a guy and I've walked around as a guy for 40 odd years. Like, I kind of don't need to know what a guy thinks about a film noir anymore. What I need to know is I need to know what somebody who is as brilliant as Imogen Sarah Smith thinks about a film noir. You know, like,
that's all I want to know. I don't care about, like, wait, here, hold on, let me have two older white guys explain this to me.
Right.
I'm like, I'm an aging white guy. I'm like, no. So who else wants that?
Yeah. It's like not only am I an aging white guy, but I have like a whole range of ages, quote unquote, knowledge to pull from as a white guy that I can then apply to this movie and say, oh, well, if I'd seen this when I was 20, I would have seen it this way. I don't need that anymore. I need her. And as soon as I found out that she had that book, that she had written that book about film noir, I just like, you know, ordered it. And she also has a book about Buster Keaton. And I'm like, I want to get that at some point too. And I'm going to learn a whole lot more about Buster Keaton, because she's brilliant. Like, she's insightful, poetic. She's just brilliant. Yeah. If we ever interview anyone on this show, or if I ever interview anyone on this show, she's definitely going to be on the list. And she'd probably be like, no, I'm not coming on your stupid fucking show.
She'd be like, you did 2 Chuck Norris movies at a time.
Wait, you did a Chuck Norris and a Bruce Lee episode? I don't know, dude. I don't know.
No, I think she's great. I did not know as much about her, and then like her interview in the extras, and you've sold me on getting that book, so I'm like, I'm all for it.
She writes a column in Film Comment, I think, too.
Awesome.
So yeah, she's brilliant. So look up her book, Imogen Sarah Smith. It's IMOGEN, Sarah Smith.
Nice.
Look her up. So I guess that's it. I mean,
I'm really hoping people are listening to this after seeing the Del Toro movie.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing the Del Toro one, but I am very glad to have seen this one. And a lot of times when you're like, ooh, they remade it, you're like, oh, I can see why. But this one is just a great movie.
Del Toro's got stuff to live up to.
He does.
Okay. Well, great. Well, thanks, buddy.
Thank you.
This is
Thank
great.
you. This was awesome.
And we'll talk again soon.
That sounds good.
All right.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Coming soon to this drive-in theater.
Safe thing to do is track a new course back up online.
Then what we gonna do? Sit out there like a bunch of goddamn ducks? You and your half-breed son get to walk on out? I'm talking to you.
The proper thing to do would be to finish him off quick.
He's to be cared for as long as necessary.
I understand. Get away! Help!
What happened?
We did what we had to do. He was buried right.
All I had was my boy, and he took him from me, you understand? He's afraid. He knows how far I came to find him. Afraid to die anymore. I've done it already.
Thank you for joining us at the All Night Drive-In Picture Show. We hope you enjoyed our feature this evening. You can follow us on social media at the All Night Drive-In Picture Show page on Facebook or at All Night Drive-In on Twitter and Instagram. If you have questions, comments, or movie requests, you can send them to our email address at allnightdriveinpictureshow@gmail.com. We appreciate your patronage. Don't forget to hang up your speaker, and please drive carefully on your way out.